I want to point out that I'm not talking about a race or ethnicity. I'm talking about the consequences of ideas. When I talk about Islam, I'm talking about John Walker Lynn, the white guy from Marin County who went off to fight with the Taliban. We are at war, to digress briefly into our current situation. We are at war with Islamic fundamentalism. Not merely Al-Qaeda, not extremist Islam. The mainstream doctrine of Islam contains this notion of martyrdom and jihad. It contains this imperative to convert, subjugate, or kill infidels. Anyone who says it doesn't has not read the Quran, has not read the Hadith. If you doubt this, if you think, I'm sure there are people in this room who are still thinking, no, it can't be religion. This is lack of economic opportunity. It's lack of educational opportunity in the Muslim world. Just contemplate for a moment the biographies of the 19 men who woke up on September 11th, 2001 and decided to slit the throats of stewardesses and fly planes into buildings. Okay, these guys were college educated to a man. Many of them had PhDs. Many of them had been educated in the West. They were middle class or better. I don't know how many architects and engineers need to hit the wall at 400 miles an hour for us to get it into our heads that this is not merely a problem of education or economics. These were not guys who had spent a lot of time agitating about regime change in the Middle East. These were guys who spent an inordinate amount of time at their local mosque in Hamburg talking about the pleasures that await martyrs in paradise and demonizing infidel culture. The circumstance we are in is much more sinister than many want to realize. It is possible to be so well educated that you can build a nuclear bomb and to still think you're going to get the 72 virgins in paradise. That is how partitioned the human mind is, and that is how balkanized our discourse is. That is how immune religious propositions are to critical pressure, conversational pressure in our discourse. We consider the possibility of improving the Ten Commandments. This may seem to be setting the bar kind of high because this is the only part of the Bible, the only text that God felt the need to physically write himself and in stone. Consider the second commandment. Thou shalt not erect any graven images. Is this really the second most important thing upon which to admonish all future generations of human beings? I mean, is this as good as it gets, ethically and spiritually? I mean, you remember the Muslims who rioted by the hundreds of thousands over cartoons. What got them so riled up? Well, this is it, the second commandment. Now, was all that pious mayhem, the burning of embassies, the killing of nuns, was all of that some kind of great flowering of spiritual and ethical intelligence? Or was it egregious medieval stupidity? Well, come to think of it, it was egregious medieval stupidity. When we're advocating scientific reasoning, when we're advocating having your convictions scale with evidence and cogent arguments, then we are of necessity attacking religion, or so people like Richard and myself argue. I mean, there is a zero-sum conflict between believing things for good reasons and believing things for bad reasons. In the United States, 20 of the 50 states have made it legal, or it's still legal, it's long been legal, to beat children in their schools with a significant wooden paddle. I mean, not just a rap on the knuckles, but actually, a strange man comes up and beats your child with a wooden board. This is legal, and hundreds of thousands of children every year are beaten, sometimes bloody, by their teachers, not with the consent of their parents. I mean, and this is needless to say, is all anchored to religion and proverbs, not to spare the rod on a child. And from the point of view of psychological science, this is not good. This is not good for children. And at a certain, we may not know that now at the level of data in a way that's utterly compelling, or it can be made utterly compelling. But if we know anything, if we discover anything at all about how children can develop healthily in a cognitive and emotional sense, at some point it's going to be like smoking causes lung cancer. and that will be, by definition, intrusive into people's. It won't be just a matter of reasoning, it'll be a matter of science saying what is good for us. We are building a civilization of ignorance. And it's not just that we're in danger of losing our technological edge to China, or that medical research may be impeded, although those things undoubtedly are happening. 44% of Americans want us to stop teaching our children about the biological fact of evolution. 62% actually want us to teach creationism in schools, but 44% want only creationism. This is 44% of the electorate. This is 150 million people in our country. 150 million people believe that a historical figure, who incidentally was crucified 2,000 years ago, is going to come out of the sky like a superhero and wield his magic powers over the face of the earth, kill all the bad people, and save the day sometime in the next 50 years. Rational argument actually does occasionally, and I think rather often, change people's minds about God. I mean, I am the recipient of thousands upon thousands of emails now from people who used to be fundamentalists, who got argued out of it. I mean, trying to square their ludicrous beliefs about the world with the consequences of those beliefs and with the testimony of rationality on 100 fronts has eroded their confidence in those beliefs. And you wouldn't know this. I mean, we have this kind of shibboleth which says you can't what wasn't reasoned into existence can't be reasoned out. The truth, I think, is rather much closer to this, that people are making desperate efforts, rather heroic efforts every day of their lives to be reasonable, to have a coherent worldview. And when those efforts become too costly or too embarrassing, dogma loses. And I can just tell you that there are ministers in this country preaching to flocks, ministers who have completely lost their belief but can't figure out what other job to do. And so we're just literally getting up on Sundays, espousing what they now know to be nonsense. There's every permutation of that. There are fundamentalists who become moderates who become atheists, and so it's just not true that people can't be argued out of their beliefs. It is not like if we just read the books more closely, we would discover all these reasons to be moderates. But I got news for you. I've read the books. God is not a moderate. What you find in these books, there's no place in the books where God says, when you get to the New World and you develop your 3 branches of government and you have a civil society, you can just jettison all the barbarism I recommended in the first books. These books really are engines of fundamentalism. They are engines of intolerance. There really is a wrathful Jesus in the New Testament waiting to be found in 2 Thessalonians and in Revelation, where exactly the Jesus who we have in the Left Behind series of novels that 60 million people have bought. The Jesus of just fiery wrath who's going to throw people into the pit. Okay, that is there to be discovered. Nowhere in the book does it say, well, that's bogus. It's not an accident that people like St. Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine, really the people who are still taught as the great lights of the Western tradition. In Aquinas' case, he thought heretics should be killed outright. In Augustine's case, he thought they should be tortured. Augustine's argument for the use of torture laid the foundations for the Inquisition. This is not an accident, and it's perfectly reasonable. We have this idea that the fact that we were burning heretics alive for 5 centuries in Europe, this represented some kind of departure, a civilizational departure into psychopathology. It didn't. It is perfectly reasonable to do this if you believe the books. It seems to me that religion gives people bad reasons to be good, where good reasons are actually available. I mean, ask yourself, which is more moral? Helping the poor, feeding the hungry, defending the weak, out of a mere concern for their well-being, or doing so because you think the creator of the universe wants you to do it? The truth is, people do not need to be threatened with damnation to love their children, to love their friends, to want to collaborate with strangers, or indeed to recognize that helping strangers can be one of their greatest sources of happiness. And what kind of morality is it that is entirely predicated on a self-interested desire to escape damnation? This seems to bypass the very core of what we mean by morality, which is an actual concern for the welfare of other human beings. Clearly, it is possible to teach our children to form such a concern and to grow in empathy and compassion without lying to ourselves or to them about the nature of the universe, without pretending to know things we do not know.
Another thing that was interesting in that poll was that physicians were more likely than scientists. 60% of U.S. physicians believe in a personal God. I think that probably shouldn't be surprising, simply because physicians are the people who have to tell people all day long that they're going to die. And I think death is very much central to this, what is otherwise quite an astonishing feature of our discourse, that so many people believe the preposterous. I mean, there is no story that is going to so totally inure you to the tragedy of the death of your own child better than the story that she has been taken up to be with Jesus again, and you're going to see her in a few short years. And so these religious myths are paying enormous dividends, emotional dividends for people, and I think it is the job of science to present a fully positive account of just how we can be happy and in this world and reconciled to our circumstance. The alternative that religion is essentially offering people in that situation is the alternative to learning how to grieve. I mean, rather than learn how to grieve as children, we learn how to believe that death doesn't exist, or is in some cases a good thing, the best thing that could possibly happen to you as you get in this cult of martyrdom.
I take ethics and spirituality very seriously. I think ethics and spirituality are the only game in town, ultimately. They lie at the core of what is most beautiful and profound and necessary in our circumstance as human beings. But what I'm asking you to entertain is that there is nothing we need to believe on insufficient evidence in order to have deeply ethical and spiritual lives. There's nothing that we need to believe on insufficient evidence to invoke the power of ritual, to build beautiful sanctuaries, to come together as communities. What we really need is a contemplative science. We need a way of talking about human well-being and the possibilities of human happiness that is as totally unconstrained by dogma as science is. So I'm just asking you to imagine what it would be like to have a society where our conversation about human well-being could proceed totally unconstrained by dogma, where really we could bring the full measure of our creativity to bear on questions of human happiness. And my argument is that to get there, to get from here to there, the end game for civilization is not mere tolerance of other people's irrationality. It is not political correctness. It is reason. Thank you very much.